of these cars killed more Americans than some wars. And no, it wasn't because of reckless driving, it was baked into the metal by design. In 1971, a 17-year-old kid named Mark slammed into a pole on his way to prom. He never made it. His car, a Hetman G-Force. And Mark was one of more than 4,000 lives taken by this ride. Today, we're counting down the 10 deadliest muscle cars ever built, ranked by actual body count, and if your dad owned one of these, he was luckier than he'll ever know. The 1960s and 70s were supposed to be about freedom, power, and the open road that was the raise of American muscles. But Detroit had a dirty secret. The result? A generation of cars that were essentially missiles with leather seats. These weren't accidents waiting to happen. They were predictable consequences of putting profit over people. In the next minutes, you'll discover the top 10 Widowmaker muscle cars, why manufacturers kept a design they knew was killing people, and the shocking government cover-up that kept these death traps on the road for decades. We're talking about cars so deadly, you'd have better luck hugging a lightning rod in a thunderstorm. Over 50,000 people gone by these 10 killers. These things didn't drive, they hunted. So buckle up, because this ride through automotive history is about to get deadly. Starting our countdown at number 10, the Plymouth Cuda. This wasn't just a car, it was a statement, and that statement was, I have a death wish. Picture this, you're 22 years old in 1970. You walk into a Plymouth dealership and there it is, a Hemi Cuda with 425 horsepower. The salesman doesn't mention that it has the aerodynamics of a brick and brakes designed for a car half its weight. The Cuda had one job, go fast, and it did. Straight into walls, poles, and oncoming traffic. With a 0 to 60 time of 5.6 seconds and stopping distance that would make modern lawyers weep, this car killed 847 people in its 4-year production run. But here's what Plymouth didn't tell you. They knew. Internal memos from 1969 showed engineers warning about catastrophic brake failure under racing conditions. Racing conditions? Try trying to stop at a red light. The most tragic part? Most victims were under 25. Kids who thought they were buying freedom ended up buying a one-way ticket. But if you think Cuda's safety record was bad, wait until you hear about number 9. Number 9 will shock you because it's not the car you'd expect. The Chevrolet Chevelle SS 454, America's sweetheart turned serial killer. On paper, this looked like the perfect muscle car, 450 horsepower, classic good looks, and Chevy's reputation for reliability. So why did it kill 923 people in just one model year? The answer lies in physics that Detroit chose to ignore. When you stuff a 454 cubic inch engine into a mid-sized car, you don't just get more power, you get a front-heavy missile that loses control the moment you hit a curve. Imagine you're driving home from work on a rainy Tuesday. You take the same curve you've taken 1,000 times, but this time, your Chevelle decides the laws of physics don't apply. The front end plows straight ahead while the back end says goodbye. Chevy knew about the handling issues. A 1970 internal report called it directionally unstable at highway speeds. Their solution? Add a disclaimer in the owner's manual. Problem solved, right? The real kicker? Insurance companies started refusing to cover drivers under 25 who owned these cars. When insurance companies, who literally bet on people not dying, won't take your money, you know you're driving a death trap. But Chevelle's deadly legacy pales in comparison to number 8. Number 8 is the car that made Ford question everything. The Mustang Boss 429. Built for NASCAR homologation, sold to civilians who had no business driving it. Ford took a race car engine, literally designed for professional drivers on closed tracks, and stuffed it into a street car. What could go wrong? 1,247 deaths. That's what went wrong. You're at a stoplight, the guy next to you revs his engine. You think, I've got a Boss 429, this'll be easy. You floor it, and suddenly you're doing 80 miles per hour in a 35 zone with brakes that were designed for a car 200 horsepower lighter. The Boss 429 could hit 60 miles per hour in 5.1 seconds. It took 180 feet to stop from 60 miles per hour. For context, a modern Honda Civic stops in 120 feet. Do the math. That extra 60 feet was often the difference between a close call and a closed casket. But here's the part that'll make you angry. Ford knew exactly what they were doing. Internal documents show they calculated the acceptable loss ratio, corporate speak for how many people can die before it hurts our profits. The answer, apparently, was 1,247. But if you think this fatalities number is shocking, wait until you see number 7. Number 7 is the car that Hollywood made famous and physics made deadly, the Dodge Charger RT 440. Thanks to movies like Bullet, every guy wanted one. Unfortunately, not every guy survived one. The Charger looked like it could handle anything: aggressive stance, wide tires, racing stripes. So why did 1,456 people die behind the wheel of what looked like the ultimate driving machine? The problem was Dodge's obsession with straight-line speed. The 440 cubic inch engine produced 375 horsepower, but the suspension was basically borrowed from a family sedan. It was like putting a rocket engine on a shopping cart. Picture yourself in 1969, cruising down the highway in your new Charger. You feel invincible. Then you hit a patch of uneven pavement at 70 miles per hour, and suddenly your muscle car becomes a 3,400-pound pinball bouncing between guardrails. Dodge engineers called it dynamic instability. Victims' families called it something else entirely. The most infuriating part? Dodge had the technology to fix it. Their racing division had developed advanced suspension systems for their NASCAR cars, but adding that technology to street cars would have cost an extra $200 per vehicle. Dodge chose profits over people. 1,456 people paid the price. Do you think that was dangerous? Wait until you see number 6. Number 6 is ironic in the worst possible way. The Pontiac GTO Judge. Named after a TV show catchphrase, it became the judge, jury, and executioner for 1,678 drivers. The Judge packed a 400 cubic inch Ram Air 4 engine, producing 370 horsepower. In 1969, that was enough to launch this 3,500 pound car from 0 to 60 in 5.8 seconds. It was also enough to overwhelm every safety system Pontiac had installed. You're 19 years old, fresh out of high school. Your parents co-signed for a GTO Judge because, hey, it's a Pontiac. How dangerous could it be? 3 months later, you're taking a corner too fast, the rear end breaks loose, and you're spinning into oncoming traffic at 50 miles per hour. The Judge suffered from what engineers politely called lift-off oversteer. In plain English, when you let off the gas in a corner, the car would suddenly snap sideways. No warning, no second chances. But here's what makes this even worse. Pontiac knew about the handling issues before the car ever hit showrooms. A 1968 engineering report specifically warned about unpredictable handling characteristics under normal driving conditions. Let that sink in. Pontiac's solution: they added a disclaimer to the owner's manual and called it a day. 1,678 families would disagree with that approach. But if you think 1,678 deaths is shocking, wait until you see number 5. Number 5 has a name that proved prophetic: the Mercury Cougar Eliminator. It eliminated 1,834 people in just 2 model years. Mercury marketed this as the thinking man's muscle car. Apparently, the thinking man had a death wish. You're a successful businessman in 1969. You want something sportier than your Lincoln, but more refined than a Mustang. The Cougar Eliminator seems perfect until you discover that refined doesn't mean safe. The Eliminator came with a 428 Cobra jet engine producing 335 horsepower. What it didn't come with were brakes capable of stopping all that power or a suspension system that could handle the torque. But here's the truly criminal part. Mercury had access to Ford's advanced brake technology. They chose not to use it because it would have added $150 to the production cost. $150. That's what Mercury decided 1,834 lives were worth. Want to know how bad the braking was? Road and Track magazine tested a 1969 Eliminator and recorded a stopping distance of 195 feet from 60 miles per hour. For comparison, a 1969 Volkswagen Beetle, with drum brakes all around, stopped in 165 feet. A car with twice the horsepower had worse brakes than a Beetle. And Mercury knew it. 1,834 deaths is staggering, but wait until you see number 4. Number 4, American Motors Javelin AMX. Number 4 proves that you don't need to be a major manufacturer to build a deadly car. The American Motors Javelin AMX. AMC's attempt to compete with the big boys resulted in 2,156 deaths. Imagine you're tired of driving the same Mustangs and Camaros as everyone else. You want something unique, something that stands out. The AMX seems perfect, a 2-seat muscle car that looks like nothing else on the road. What you don't know is that AMC cut every corner possible to compete on price. While Ford and GM were investing millions in safety research, AMC was using parts bin engineering and hoping for the best. The AMX had a fatal flaw that killed more people per mile driven than any other muscle car: structural failure. Under hard acceleration or sudden impacts, the AMX's frame would literally crack, not bend, crack, like a wishbone at Thanksgiving dinner. How did AMC not know about this? They did. Internal testing showed frame failures at forces well within normal driving conditions. AMC's response: they quietly reinforced the frames on 1971 models and hoped no one would notice. They never issued a recall for the 1968 to 1970 models. 2,156 people noticed. Their families are still noticing. But if you think that deaths numbers are horrific, wait until you see the podium. Number 3, Oldsmobile 442 with 30. Number 3 will surprise you because Oldsmobile had a reputation for building sensible cars. The 442 W30. This sensible car killed 2,847 people. You're a middle-aged professional in 1970. You want something exciting but not too flashy. The 442 seems perfect, and Oldsmobile's refined take on the muscle car. What you don't realize is that you're buying a wolf in sheep's clothing. The W30 package turned the already powerful 442 into a monster. 370 horsepower from a 455 cubic inch engine. But here's the kicker: Oldsmobile underrated the power figures for insurance purposes. Independent testing showed the W30 actually produced closer to 420 horsepower. Oldsmobile was literally lying about how dangerous their car was. Why lie? Because insurance companies were starting to refuse coverage for high-performance cars. By underrating the power, Oldsmobile kept insurance costs down and sales up. But what made the W30 so deadly wasn't just the power, it was the weight distribution. The massive 455 engine created a 60-40 front-to-rear weight bias. In a panic stop, the rear wheels would lock up first, sending the car into an uncontrollable spin. Picture this: you're driving your family to dinner on a Sunday evening. A kid chases a ball into the street. You slam on the brakes, and instead of stopping, your sensible Oldsmobile starts spinning like a top. Oldsmobile engineers knew about the weight distribution problem. Their solution: they recommended experienced drivers only in internal memos. They never told customers. 2,847 families learned the hard way that experienced wasn't enough. But if you think Oldsmobile's deaths is staggering, wait until you see number 2. Number 2, Chevrolet Camaro, 1967 to 1969. Number 2 is the car that broke Chevrolet's heart. Designed to beat Ford on the track, it ended up beating 3,421 people to the grave. You're young, you're fast, and you want the ultimate driving machine. Promises track-bred performance for the street. What it delivers is a car that requires professional-level skills to drive safely. The Z was essentially a race car with license plates, 302 cubic inches of pure aggression, tuned for maximum power at high RPM. On a racetrack with professional drivers, it was brilliant. On public roads with amateur drivers, it was a weapon of mass destruction. But here's what makes this tragedy even worse: Chevrolet marketed the 28 to college students. Think about that. They took a car that required professional level driving skills and marketed it to 19-year-olds who'd been driving for 3 years. 28 had a quirk that killed more young drivers than any other single factor: lift throttle over steer. When you lifted off the throttle in a corner, a natural reaction when you realize you're going too fast, 28 would suddenly snap sideways. No warning, no recovery time, just physics and tragedy. Imagine you're driving to your girlfriend's house on a Friday night. You take a familiar corner a little too fast, realize your mistake, and lift off the gas. In any normal car, you'd scrub off speed and continue on your way. In a Z28, you'd suddenly find yourself sliding sideways toward a tree at 45 miles per hour. Chevrolet knew about this handling characteristic. They called it spirited performance. Coroners called it something else. The average age of Z fatalities was 22. These weren't reckless drivers. They were kids who bought a car that was designed to kill them. Number 1. Ford Mustang Mach 1428 Cobra Jet, 1969 to Number 1 is the deadliest muscle car ever built, and it wears the badge of America's most beloved pony car, the Ford Mustang Mach 1428 Cobra Jet. This car killed 4,850 people in just 2 model years. You walk into a Ford dealership in 1969. The salesman shows you a beautiful Mach 1, aggressive stripes, hood scoop, the works. He tells you about the 428 Cobra Jet engine, the Ram air induction, the 4-speed transmission. What he doesn't tell you is that you're looking at the most dangerous car ever sold to the American public. The 428 Cobra Jet produced 335 horsepower on paper, but Ford was lying. Independent testing showed it actually made closer to 400 horsepower. Why lie? Because 400 horsepower would have made the car uninsurable for most buyers. But the power wasn't the real killer, it was Ford's cost cutting. To keep the Mach 1 competitively priced, Ford used the same brakes and suspension as the base Mustang. Imagine putting a rocket engine in a go-kart and you'll understand the problem. How bad were the brakes? A 1969 Mach 1 needed 220 feet to stop from 60 miles per hour. A modern Ford F-150 pickup truck stops in 133 feet. A truck weighing 1,000 pounds more stops 87 feet shorter. That's not just bad engineering, that's criminal negligence. Picture this, you're driving your new Mach 1 down a busy street. Traffic suddenly stops ahead. You hit the brakes with plenty of time to stop in any normal car, but this isn't a normal car. You watch in horror as you plow into the car ahead at 30 miles per hour, even though you started braking 200 feet back. Ford knew about the brake problem before the first Mach 1 rolled off the assembly line. Internal memos from 1968 show Ford engineers warning about inadequate braking performance under normal driving conditions. Ford's response? They added a warning sticker to the sun visor. Problem solved. That sticker didn't save 4,850 lives. It didn't save Mark, the 17-year-old who never made it to prom. It didn't save the thousands of other young people who thought they were buying the American dream. They were buying a nightmare. But here's the part that'll make you furious. The government knew. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration had data on every single one of these cars. They knew the death rates, they knew the design flaws, they knew the cover-ups. And they did nothing. Why? Because Detroit had more lobbyists than safety advocates had lawyers. Because the auto industry employed millions of voters. Because admitting the truth would have meant admitting that the government had failed to protect its own citizens. While families buried their children, politicians buried the evidence. While coroners signed death certificates, bureaucrats signed non-disclosure agreements. It took until 1975 and thousands more deaths before meaningful safety regulations were finally implemented. By then, it was too late for the 20,000 plus people who died in these 10 cars alone. Today's muscle cars are faster, more powerful, and infinitely safer than their ancestors. Modern Mustangs, Camaros, and Challengers have more horsepower than their 1960s counterparts, but they also have ABS, stability control, airbags, and crumple zones. The difference? Today's automakers learned that killing your customers is bad for business. It only took 20,000 deaths to figure that out. So the next time you see a pristine 1969 Mach 1 or a numbers matching Z/28, remember, you're not just looking at automotive history, you're looking at a survivor. And remember the ones who didn't survive. If this opened your eyes to the dark side of automotive history, hit that subscribe button. Next video, we're covering the 450 horsepower monster that couldn't stop and killed its drivers, that made this countdown muscle look like child's play and killed even more people. So hit subscribe, the road isn't getting safer.